Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, we're going to dive into the gentle yet emotional journey of Diep and Huyen. From the quiet mornings feeding chickens, to moments of reflection in the fields, to the warmth of sharing a simple meal together. It's a story about slowing down, finding peace in the everyday, and discovering a fragile sense of belonging after years of restlessness. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss the next chapters waiting ahead. Hello everyone, my dear friends. Welcome back to Huyen's channel. Before we dive into today's story, I want to take a moment to truly thank all of you. Your support, your words of encouragement, and your quiet presence through every episode have been my strength. You've walked with me through storms, and because of you, I've found the courage to keep going, even when life seemed unbearably heavy. As you already know, the journey of Huyen and Diep has never been smooth. It hasn't been a fairy tale where everything falls into place. We've faced trials that came like giant waves, unexpected, relentless, threatening to sweep away everything we've built. Tears, pain, and countless silent sacrifices became part of our days, leaving scars we thought might never heal. Yet somehow, through faith, through love, and through a burning desire to protect our little world, we made it to this moment. But life has its own twists. Just when we began to think the storms had passed, something happened. Something we never expected. Diep's ex-wife, a figure we believed belonged to the past, returned. Like a sudden storm darkening the sky, her presence threatens to undo everything we've tried so hard to rebuild. Why is she back? Is she searching for a second chance? Or does she want to reopen the conflicts we thought were long buried? None of us know for sure, but one thing is clear. This will not be an easy chapter. There will be tense moments. There will be tears. And there will be choices that could shape our lives forever. Will love stand firm, or will it be swept away by the force of the past? You, my dear friends, who have been following this story, will see the truth unfold with me. Get ready, because what's coming will hold twists and turns even more surprising than anything we've seen so far. This isn't just a love story. It's a story about courage, about struggle, about testing the very limits of the human heart. Maybe, as you listen, you'll even find a lesson for your own life hidden inside these moments. After days filled with uncertainty, Diep's mother, Doña Sam, finally returned from abroad. But this time, her arrival felt different. There was no tension in her eyes, no shadow of doubt. Instead, she carried peace, her gaze soft and warm, her blessing sincere. She wished us a life full of happiness, and even promised that, if things worked out, she would help us move with her to a distant land someday. When she left, closing the door quietly behind her, it felt like our small house filled with a new kind of light. Life had given us a rare moment of calm again, and we cherished it. That morning, Maya woke up very early to get ready for school. The sound of her little footsteps echoing across the yard wrapped my heart in a warmth I can't fully explain. After she left, I stayed home and looked out at our old garden, neglected, dry, and waiting. The soil was cracked and tired, as though it was longing for someone to care for it again. I decided to roll up my sleeves and begin, clearing the weeds, turning the earth, preparing the soil for something new. It wasn't just housework, it was a quiet joy, a small step toward a new beginning. I wanted to plant fresh vegetable seeds there, not just to add something healthy to our meals, but also to sell a little and earn some extra income. As I dug, breathing in the damp scent of the earth, I understood something clearly. Happiness can live in the simplest of things. Peace isn't far away. It's right there in small, everyday gestures. The smile of a child, the affection of someone you love, the hope for a better tomorrow. Life will always have its challenges, but standing there in the garden, watching the soil slowly transform, I felt convinced that our future could be bright and full of new confidence. Before I realized it, I had already carved 2 neat furrows into the vegetable patch. Each stroke of the hoe was heavy, but it gave me an odd sense of peace, as though I was planting hope itself into the ground. But then, the sky shifted. Tiny drops of rain began to fall, scattering across the roof, dampening my shoulders. It was the kind of drizzle that announces something heavier on the way. I looked up at the gray sky, worry flickering through me. My health hadn't been steady lately. In truth, the past few nights had been long and sleepless. The little girl had been ill, her small body burning with fever. She cried inconsolably, clinging to me with trembling arms, and I did everything I could to comfort her. But as I cared for her, I felt my own strength draining away. My breathing had grown heavy, my body weak. I couldn't ignore the thought that maybe her illness had reached me too. I knew I couldn't afford to get sick. So, reluctantly, I set my tools aside and went back inside. In the kitchen, I lit a fire. The small flames flickered, casting a warm glow in that cozy corner of our home. I reached for the medicinal herbs the neighbors had kindly given me and brewed a pot of infusion. The steam rose, carrying a strong yet comforting scent that seemed to lift the tiredness pressing on my chest, even if just a little. Sitting there by the fire, listening to raindrops patter against the roof, my mind drifted. Memories surfaced, the hard years, the storms we'd already endured, like a slow-motion movie playing behind my eyes. And in that quiet moment, I felt gratitude, because even in those storms, fate had somehow led me here. Her love, her patience, these had been my anchor. They'd taught me that the truest happiness often springs from the simplest things. And yet, despite that gratitude, a restlessness stirred in me. My thoughts turned to Tieu, Dee's ex-wife. It had been 3 years since she'd walked away, leaving behind a broken heart. In all that time, she hadn't returned, not even to say a final goodbye. Could it be that somewhere inside she still held on to some thread of attachment? Or was her silence nothing but indifference, a sign that she had completely closed the door on the past? These questions pricked at me like thorns. But I told myself what I always do. The past may cast its shadows, but what matters most is the present. I had Maya. I had a home filled with laughter and warmth. And above all, I had the belief that no matter what ghosts still lingered around us, we would continue forward, writing a new story together. A story about love, forgiveness, and hope. They say that if you speak of someone long enough, they appear. And that's exactly what happened. That day, Tieu returned, unexpected, uninvited. The last time she had shown up, it had been to demand the sale of the house and claim 80% of the money. A blow that left the family reeling and heartbroken. Everyone believed she had vanished for good after that, but not this time. This time, she came with a new agenda, to push for a divorce and test Dee's true intentions. But life is rarely simple. Even though she insisted she felt nothing for him anymore, envy flickered in her eyes every time she saw how deeply he loved me. She didn't want him, but she couldn't bear the thought of him being happy either. Her only goal was to destroy what we had built. That afternoon, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, Dee returned from work. He opened the door, and there she was, waiting. The air turned thick and heavy, like the stillness before a storm. The soft rhythm of the morning had already unfolded, yet as the hours passed, life's subtler tests began to reveal themselves. Dee, now more at ease with the chickens after his earlier hesitation, walked alongside Huyen toward the small path that led to the fields. The air was still cool, carrying with it the faint fragrance of damp soil mixed with the freshness of newly blossomed wildflowers. Huyen glanced at him, noticing how his steps were lighter, as if he had slowly begun to sync with the gentle pace of rural life. "Day," she said softly, "you'll get used to this rhythm soon. It's different from the city, but it has its own kind of peace." He smiled faintly, brushing some loose strands of hair from his forehead. "I know. It's just strange. Out there, everything is fast, noisy. Here, it feels like time stretches itself out." Huyen nodded. Sometimes slowness is what helps us find clarity. They reached the edge of the small vegetable plot, where rows of young seedlings stretched out neatly, each carrying the promise of growth. Huyen crouched down and began loosening the soil around a cluster of green shoots, her hands moving with a kind of natural precision. Dee hesitated for a moment before kneeling beside her, mimicking her actions clumsily. The earth clung to his fingers, cool and damp, and for a brief instant, he allowed himself to feel grounded, literally and emotionally. "Like this?" he asked, showing her his uneven work. Huyen chuckled, shaking her head gently. "Not quite, but you'll get there. The soil has to breathe. Treat it gently, like you would a child." Her words lingered, and Dee looked at her curiously. "You talk about everything as if it's alive." "Because it is," she replied, her tone matter-of-fact yet tender. "The plants, the soil, even the air here, if you listen carefully, they all have their own voices." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Comfortable, almost sacred, Dee's thoughts drifted back to his life in the city, where voices were often drowned in the constant hum of engines, deadlines, and neon lights. He wondered if he had ever truly listened to anything beyond the surface. By late morning, the sun had grown warmer, casting golden highlights across the fields. The two carried baskets of freshly picked vegetables back toward the house. Pero, sensing their return, ran out from the yard, wagging his tail with unrestrained joy. He darted around Dee, nipping playfully at his shoes, before circling Huyen and nudging the basket she held, as though eager to peek inside. "Hungry again, are you?" Huyen teased, stroking the dog's head. "Don't worry, you'll get your share." Dee laughed softly, the sound surprising even himself. It had been a long time since such a simple moment drew laughter from his chest without force. He looked at Pero, then at Huyen, and felt an unfamiliar warmth stir within him, something fragile but real. Inside the kitchen, the scent of herbs and broth soon filled the air. Huyen moved with practiced ease, chopping, stirring, and seasoning, while Day stood nearby, occasionally lending a hand, but mostly watching her with quiet fascination. He noticed the small gestures, the way she tucked stray hair behind her ear, the way her brow furrowed when she tasted the broth, the way her eyes lit up when she got it just right. "Cooking is like a kind of art for you," he remarked. Huyen glanced at him, smiling. "It's survival first. But yes, maybe art too. Food carries memories, comfort, even love." Dee leaned against the wooden counter, the aroma making him realize just how hungry he had become. "I never thought about it that way. For me, food was always just fuel, something to keep me going." "Maybe that's why you always felt restless," she said softly, not as a criticism, but as an observation. Lunch was simple, but nourishing. A steaming bowl of soup, rice, and sautéed greens. They ate together, with Pero lying at their feet, content with a small portion of meat Huyen had set aside for him. The quiet between them wasn't heavy. It was a quiet of shared presence, where words weren't always needed. Afterward, Day stepped outside, leaning against the wooden railing of the porch. The sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the yard. He took in the sight of the chickens pecking lazily, the trees swaying in the breeze, the faint hum of insects. Slowly, he began to sense something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: stillness. But as the day drifted into late afternoon, shadows of memory returned. A phone call unanswered, a voice he once longed to hear but hadn't. Regrets, like broken glass, scattered across his mind. Day pressed his palms together, breathing deeply, trying to steady himself. Huyen must have sensed his change in mood, for she walked over and stood beside him without a word. For a while, they simply looked out at the horizon, the sky painted with strokes of orange and rose. Finally, she spoke. "The past has its claws, doesn't it?" Dee closed his eyes briefly, then nodded. "It does. Sometimes I feel like it's waiting, just behind me, ready to pull me back." Huyen placed a hand lightly on the railing, her voice calm yet steady. "But you're here now. Every breath you take in this moment weakens its hold. You can choose to stay here, to build something new." Her words weren't grand, but they held weight. Dee turned to her, meeting her gaze, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to believe that maybe she was right. Evening descended gently, the sky deepening into shades of indigo. Huyen lit a lantern, its glow spilling across the porch like liquid gold. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of night-blooming flowers. Pero curled up by the doorway, already drifting into dreams. Day and Huyen sat side by side, their silhouettes outlined by the soft glow. There were no grand declarations, no promises spoken aloud, yet something unspoken wove itself between them, a fragile thread of trust, of possibility. As the stars emerged one by one, Day felt an unfamiliar sense of belonging settle within him. He didn't know how long it would last, or where this path would lead, but for now, he was here, and that was enough. Dee's quiet journey with Huyen begins in the soft light of dawn, where simple tasks like feeding chickens and tending the soil slowly draw him away from the chaos of city life. Through her gentle guidance, he learns to see the world differently. Each plant, each breath of air carrying its own voice. Shared meals, laughter, and silent evenings under the stars bring him closer to a peace he never thought possible. Yet behind these tranquil moments, shadows of his past still linger, threatening to pull him back into
Hơi thở
old
yếu ớt
regrets.
của cô vẫn còn hiện diện.
Huyen's words offer him a choice:
Cả
to
ba
remain
tay
bound
khênh
by
nhau
memory,
túc trực bên cạnh,
or to embrace
không
the
ai
fragile
buông
promise
bỏ.
of renewal.
Dù
But
chẳng
as
biết
night
cô là
falls,
ai,
one
họ
question
vẫn chọn bảo
remains:
vệ cô bởi
can Dee
một bản
truly
năng sâu
escape
thẳm
the
của
weight
con
of his
người.
past?
Trong bóng tối
Or
mịt
will it
mù,
come knocking when he
họ
least
tin rằng một
expects it?
mạng sống